taken in the very early hours of the morning to a local prison, civilian prison, thrown in solitary cells, and I suppose we were grateful still to be alive. At about some early breakfast time, an old man of Folkestone, the grandpas of the nation, were then used as sentries and guards in prisons and so on. And this old man, like myself now, probably even a bit younger than I am now, he brought round black tea, I think it was. It could have been coffee. Anyway, hot black milk and black bread. Now, we'd never eaten black bread before, but boy, in our nervous state, I ate this bread and drank this liquid, and he came round again and he indicated that would I like some more, noch meer or something. And I said, yes, sure. And he put it down, and there I learned a lesson of my life, which I've often told my grandchildren, that when food is put in front of you, eat it straight away without arguing, be grateful and eat it. Because I was so grateful there to be alive and to have a second cup of black bread, of black tea and black bread, that I thought, all right, in a few minutes I'll eat it. And meanwhile, the duty officer arrived, a young, smartly dressed. Boy, what an impressive sight this German looked. And his aide-de-camp was a German sergeant, equally smart in that. And when he came along and he looked at me, and there he saw another cup, a second helping of black tea and black bread. He asked, it must have been, but this obviously what he's saying, how come this guy, this Luftgangster, is offered a second cup? With that, his sergeant put his hands through the bar doors and smashed the extra cup of coffee and the black bread onto the floor. And when my grandchildren were younger, I used to tell them that story, and then it would bring a smile to my face as they would look around to see who's coming to smash their food onto the floor. Okay. All right, eventually we were taken. I'll shorten up now. We were taken next day. The fight was going on all around us in the city, and there were bombs and explosion and heavy caliber guns firing off. And then later in the morning, we were escorted out, put into a small bus, the 6 of us, with about a few, anyway, lots of escort, with cannons, machine guns loaded onto bokkies following us, because the partisans, the Poles, might have attempted to rescue us. And we were taken and out of the city onto a farm, deserted farmhouse, and we were placed there for a week in a house that had been burglar-proofed and so on. And we were all together. I'm shortening up now. And then after a week, we were taken into, here's something that would be interest of you. The night before I left my home in Durban, my mother and father gave me a little Bible, which I've got here in our home, little black Bible, and in the front with my father's lovely, beautiful handwriting, it had Bryan D. Jones, my home address 204 Nicholson Road, Durban, with love from your parents. And remember I told you the morning we had gone to church service in a converted stable? Well, I had that Bible in my jacket, my tunic jacket. And in the panic of getting away, we weren't subject to the normal security, opening your pockets and checking you didn't have any incriminating evidence on you. And that Bible was not detected until we got into that farmhouse there. And I took it out, and there I saw my home address, my name. And very foolishly, but we had the security thing drummed into us that all you are liable to say name, rank and number in terms of the Geneva Convention. So I signalled to the sentry outside our farmhouse jail, and I said I wanted to go to the toilet, which was a little tin shack out in the garden, and he took me along, and there I stood and closed the door, and I took the Bible out of my hand, and I was just tearing the address off the leaflet when the sentry, who had been looking through a hole, you know those farmhouse toilets often have a hole in the corrugated iron. And I remember him saying, "Was haben Sie da? Was haben Sie?" And I dropped that leaf out, and it went floating down into the mire in the deep hole there. All right, a little bit of laughter. All right, so then we went into, I'll really rush now. We were taken after a week, escorted by 3 young Germans in a comfortable train, passenger compartment. Must have been 2 for 6, 7 of us to have been in that. Anyway, and it took us several days to zigzag across Germany, and each day we'd see more signs of the havoc the Air Force was wreaking on German civilian life. It was really something to see the wreckage following a 1,000-bomber raid on Dresden and other places, and we came to Frankfurt on Main, on the Rhine, and that was to be where we would be interrogated. And I pay respect to the German guards that they concealed us in that compartment. They put the shutters up, and they stood outside and made sure the civilians didn't know who was in there, because that city had just suffered a 1,000-bomber raid that night. And you don't know what the civilians might have done to us if they knew we were inside that compartment. That's a true story. It sounds dramatic, but that's how things were. And we ended up at Oberrassel, a suburb of Frankfurt on Main, and we arrived there at the start of the next day with the staff getting off of the interrogating staff, the knowledgeable people, the consultants, the what's my daughter today, the psychologists who would be our interrogators coming to work, and we were duly processed. We were kept in solitary confinement, and the Germans would see you initially after you with the promise. Again, an old Volksturm grandpa would tell you how sorry he was that you had been shot down and subject to all that had gone on. But he promised if we would fill in this form now, he would make sure that your mother, my mother in this case, would know immediately that I was alive. And of course we didn't. We obediently just gave name, rank and number. And then he turned from a nice, gentle old grandpa into a rather rough one. And we were thrown in solitary confinement, according to how much they thought you had told them or they could get out of you. I remember after about the third time they'd seen me and we'd made no progress in telling them what they thought they wanted from me, the man who handled me said, "Well, Mr. Jones, you haven't been very cooperative, but time will tell. Time will tell. But tell me, Mr. Jones, we are most interested why you insist on saying you're a South African, when quite obviously you're an Englishman. I should know. I studied in Britain. And I can hear from your topic and your grammar, your tongue and your grammar, that you are obviously an Englishman." And so that's how the story went. We left it like that, but often I've thought again, am I talking English or South African English? Okay, after 14 days, when most of our crew, I knew, they would let you know somehow. You'd see them going to the toilet or say, had been processed and released. A young German officer came along, very smartly dressed. He gave me a Heil Hitler, and he said he brought the compliments and apologies from the commandant, who said he had neglected me. He was conscious of that. Please excuse him, but would I please come to his house for cocktails that afternoon? Now it's quite, I didn't demand an invitation with gold lettering on it. Of course I said, yes, sure, okay. And he fetched me and we went to his house in the compound, and there were a couple of other people. There was a South African colonel who we think came from 15 Squadron. We didn't have too much talk amongst each other, and we weren't sure whether he was one of us really or not. Oh, by the way, when I was first put into solitary, they threw in a young airman in Canadian, RCAF, Royal Canadian Air Force, lapels on his shoulders. And he fell on the ground, and he was in a bad way, and I got up to help him and see, what have they done to you? And soon enough, he recovered to ask me, where are you from? What squadron were you? Oh, and what were you doing here? And all questions that it suddenly dawned on me, a stranger should never ask. And when I stuck to name, rank and number, he just stood up quite unharmed, knocked on the door, and the sentry came and took him away. He was a stool pigeon. But that truly happened. It's just another incident. Okay, we were having the snaps and the cold drinks and the little sweetmeats or little things, cocktails, man. And it was quite enjoyable. And all of a sudden, the commandant and his supporting officers stood rigidly to attention. Absolutely, it was remarkable. And I looked round to see what was causing them to be so nervous, when I saw 3 men, 2 in the grey, dark grey, and that insignia, the crossbones of the Gestapo had entered, and they had another white-haired man in a black suit. And these were Gestapo. And the drinks and the cocktails and each just vanished. The curtains were drawn, and the German commandant eventually sat down, I suppose. I didn't take any notice of him. I was scared, so scared myself. And the one Gestapo said, "Herr Jones, you must tell us about the new high-level bomb site which the RAF has been used. We know they're using it to mine the harbours in northeast, northern Europe. Apparently the RAF were dropping floating mines there by aiming them with a special bomb site. I never knew such a thing. And of course I started my name, rank and number Geneva Convention, and then they really roughed up. As I say, the lights were turned off and they had a spotlight played onto my forehead, and they all snapped questions one or the other. The only question I really recall was the Gestapo behind me said to his colleagues, "Hey Fritz, which year was it that we cut off that young man in Hamburg?" The pronunciation of Hamburg. In Hamburg last week. You remember the young man who wouldn't cooperate us and give us the information he wanted? Now, boy, I was petrified then. I just felt my ears, or imagined myself walking around without any ears. And I started making up some stories, and they just told, "Shut up, man." You know, they knew it was nonsense. It would be nice if I told you, I just said, "God, please help me." I didn't. I'm not. But looking back, he was with me there as well, because suddenly I was rescued. At that critical point, the air raid sirens started wailing and wailing and wailing. And remember Hamburg, the previous night it had 1,000 bomb raid? Quickly he must have pressed the button and summoned the guard, "Take this man away, lock him up." And they marched me off, and I can really remember I was sniffing, sniveling, and I suppose I was crying. And I just collapsed on my palliasse straw mattress, and that's it. And the air raid carried on around the city. And next morning, but God was good. I'll say that today from a safe distance. The next morning, the orderly came and said, "Come and see me." And they took me to the bathroom and gave me something to have a shave and a shower. And I only could put on the same clothes that I must have worn then for 3 weeks. And they gave me something to eat. And I soon joined at least 2 others, Cletty and Fall. I think the non-commissioned officers were put on another train, and the 3 of us were sent back east now to Upper Silesia, east of Berlin. No, of Frankfurt, where I was. And I'll finish just with one story here. We arrived in a cold autumn afternoon at this secluded camp with big barbed wire fences and pillboxes and dogs and guards marching up and down. And there were hundreds of prisoners who all flocked to the gate to see who had arrived. And I heard a voice out of that mob say, "Bryan Jones! Hey, Bryan Jones! It's Gordon Jack! It's Gordon Jack!" Now, Gordon Jack was a man about 3 years older than I. He went to Grey College in Bloemfontein. I had met him on the Durban beach in the same old CSSM beachside services that I was telling you we attended as school children.
Yeah.
And he had gone to Wits. He later became chief electrical engineer on the SAAF. And there he was, and I didn't even know he was in the Air Force, never mind the fact that he'd been shot down in the Western Desert. And there he was calling out my name. I just think, I don't know who's going to be listening to this one day, but subsequently, when I've, as a minister in the church, I've gone to particularly widows to try and console them and attend to their needs and plan a funeral. Often they would say, I wonder where he is now. He was such a good man, or this or that or something, but he suffered so much and that. I wonder where he is and what's happened. I got inspired to tell them that story of Gordon Jack saying, hey, Brian Jones, Gordon Jack here. I said, you know, according to the Bible, those of us who trust Jesus as Saviour, we go straight to heaven. And there we're going to be surprised who's there. And later I've added we're going to be surprised who's not there. People who made out they were redeemed and made their peace with God. Unfortunately, they may not have been genuine, and they won't be in the Lord's presence. But that's a little diversion. There followed months of prisoner camp at Stadluft 3A, the same camp from which the Great Escape took place, with a South African mining engineer masterminded digging tunnels underneath their camp, and on Hitler's orders they shot 76 of prisoners who had escaped from that camp and been caught in various places in Germany. And then in the beginning of January, the Russians started breaking out. They'd entered Warsaw and they started advancing westwards. And we could hear the Russian army and see the aircraft coming closer, closer and closer. And one day they marched us off at night. They took us out and we were marched westwards. And we marched for, 2 weeks. We eventually, our senior officers gave our escorts his word of honor that we would not attempt to escape, provided they found a shelter for every night, because it was winter, it was snowing, it was cold. And that's what happened. They would stop and they'd come to a deserted school. Once there was a church in a little town called Moscow, Moskau. That's a German Moscow. And we were billeted in a huge church. And there we slept in the pews or up in the pulpit or somewhere. We had our little patented tin lamps that we made out of. We would chop splinters of wood off the beds of the posts of the doorposts, or our beds themselves, or the pews of the church, and you could heat up water. And with the Red Cross meager rations we had, we would make ourselves something hot to drink. And then we were thrown aboard cattle trucks. I remember the side of the trucks was printed 15 horses or, I don't know, so many men, men. So we were the men part and no horses, and they would crowd us over there. They never stopped for toilet purposes or anything. We got sick. I personally got sick with diarrhea, and when we came to the end of the railway line, they made us march on. My long-time friend John Coleman, who had trained with me right from the word go at Littleton, he dragged me through this. We were a squadron together. He'd also volunteered to be an observer. We were bosom pals. And here I was, staggering along with the diarrhea. And one time he said to me, "Davy, I can't carry you, I can't urge you on any longer. Here's a German bokkie was parked along the road as we marched past." He said, "Come." And he lifted me up, threw me in the back of this bokkie. And I remember his words, "See you back in the Union." You know, South Africa was the Union in those days. "See you back in the Union." And off he went that way, and I just lay it, not caring where I was. At evening, this bokkie just happened to stop at a school, deserted school. I crawled over, fell out of the thing, and crawled in and under a table in the entrance or classroom, and I just lay there. That night, I was wakened with the tramping, tramp, 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 tramp of marching feet. Men came into the school, and I recognized South African voices, either speaking Afrikaans or South African English. Boy, what isn't it a miracle that of all the places I should end up there? And I got out, and there, who was there? John Coleman. Now, isn't that a miracle? God is good, eh? Oh, God is good. And then we ended up, we were put in another camp. I've forgotten its name. 13 kilometers south of Berlin. So at 7:30, for over a month, you could set your watches when RAF mosquito bombers, those very fast bombers, would come in and drop bombs over Berlin. And the walls would shake 13 kilometers further away. And then one day they said, "Okay, we're evacuating you. We're taking you to hold you down in the Bavarian Alps, down near Munich. You're going to be war hostages." Air Force officers were to be bartered for peace. And we got down into that train, and a few American Thunderbolts, that's an American heavy fighter plane, they came over, and they dived down and they dropped bombs on the railway line behind the train. They went up and they dropped bombs in front of the train, and it couldn't go anywhere. Then they went up and did a victory roll, and then they just flew off.
So they knew.
And the Germans then said, back to barracks, and we all marched back to the barracks. And eventually, after then, the Russians came. I've got a story there. It was a Sunday. And I'd got up early to go to the toilet, a short way away. And as I went there, I looked up and there was a light aircraft strafing in the woods just near us. And I thought, that's funny, that's a German aircraft. And it dawned on me, if a German aircraft was strafing in our nearby woods, it could only mean the Russians were there.
Yes.
And I remember running in and saying, wake up chaps, well, the Ruskies are here. And we all got up. And around about 8 o'clock, these Russian Tiger tanks just came along. They didn't bother to open the gates. They were heavy wooden frame gates with wire netting on it, you know, makeshift things. They just drove straight through them and flattened them, boy. Flattened everything in there. And on the tanks, some of them had women they had picked up, either girls from their homeland or girls they'd picked up on the way. And they just put them top of the tanks, and they were wild. They looked wild. And we quietly stood there and said, boy, the wrong nation has been crushed, because those Ruskies did look real rough. We heard gunshot wounds as they came in, and they interrogated our senior officers. And we were told that the ones who had roughed us up or were, bad to us were eliminated straight away. They marched them off and you heard brrr, brrr. Now, I'm only told you, I didn't see it myself, but it was very likely that was happening. We were kept there for a few weeks, and then the Brits, who are great on organisation, just as they can do any pomp and ceremony, Olympic Games or crowning of a queen or something, they do it par excellence. Eh? And they set up a security camp. I remember they said, all line up, and they pointed to me and said, here, you're tall enough to be a policeman, come over here. And at 21, I was a policeman in the camp. But it gave me permission. I had the freedom to walk in and out of our camp. I wasn't rushed up. And that opened me to other experiences. I think I've spoken so long, let me tell you about them. One was...
Yeah, the last one, that is nearly finished.
Shall I stop?
No, tell the story.
One was in my policeman patrolling outside. We went down to the commandant's house and we took mattresses, spring mattresses and all sorts. We brought them back to the chaps in the barracks. A New Zealand Fleet Air Arm man saw the colonel's dog, a magnificent Alsatian. He said, that's mine. And he somehow let it be known that was his. And when they came to evacuate us some weeks later, they said, leave the dog. He said, right, I'll stay here with him. And I often wondered what happened to him. He stayed with his dog. There was a reservoir that fed water to our large camp. There were 20,000 refugees, women and children were forced into our camp. And we shared a toilet, open shared toilets together. That's how the life was then. And I went one day just down to see how the water and the dam, and some chaps were trying to catch with a tree trunk, a bit of wood from a tree and a pin, and the Ruskies came and said, no. And he clipped off his bent hand grenade, and it just clipped and he threw, and and the dead fish floated to the top. Eh? What a story. I'll tell you another simpler one. Also, use my liberty, I used to leave the camp and walk in the nearby woods. Lovely. Hear birds singing, green grass and leaves and that. Then I heard church music. And I walked through the trees heading towards that noise. And there was a little chapel built in local stone. And I went in and I sat at the back while a Welshman who was a prisoner in our camp, I recognized him immediately, was on an organ which was in the choir loft, high up in the church, high up, eh? And he was playing. Right, eventually we would come back, we went to Liverpool. I must tell you this, that we got to Britain, we were taken to Brighton on Sea, and they had commandeered all the beach hotels and the flats and that, and we lived in fine style there. And I won't tell you about the horrible thing I did with a girl that I invited. No, I won't tell that story. All right. But now comes the day, those of us who hadn't demanded to be flown home, we came home by Union Castle ships. We went down, a train down to Southampton, walk along the docks, and there the ship is in, I think it was Athlone Castle, but I can't be sure. And standing at the bottom of the stairs was a short-ass pommy handing out either green or red cards according to your rank. And I think everyone from a captain lower, might be a lieutenant lower, would get a green card. And they would have to go upstairs and the crew would just ignore them, go down there. And they would be sent downstairs, and they slept for 2 weeks in 6 bunk-high bunks. But when he looked at me, and he couldn't see what rank I had, so he played SAAF, and he dealt from the bottom of the pack, and he gave me a red card. Yes, he was short, you see. And now I wasn't guilty. I didn't know red was different to green. I just took it, and I went up the stairs, and as I got onto the ship, boy, the steward said, "Sir, can we carry your coat? Can we carry your kit bag? Come this way, sir." And we took me to a cabin, and here unpacked, and you can just call us, ring the bell, we'll be here for anything, sir. Hope you'll be comfortable. And later, it was 2 berth. The other guy came, and he was from the Royal Durban Light Infantry, and his name was Neville Holmes. And you just might remember that some years back, on the appeal judge in Bloemfontein, it was Judge Neville Holmes, head of that under the previous government, and he shared cabin back to. So next morning we get out on sea, and the boat is going along the fight, and I hear the tannoy says, "Will Lieutenant B.D. Jones, South African Air Force, immediately report to officer command in the ship?" So that's me. So I go along, and there's General Klopper, who'd surrendered to Brook, you see? And he's a stoutish, genial guy. And he said, I saluted, said, "Lieutenant Jones." "Oh yes, Lieutenant. Tell me, I'm told that you have a cabin, a single or a luxury cabin. Can you explain that? Whilst the rest of your mates are down in the swimming pool and all that." And I told him the story. And he sat back and he laughed. I remember he put on weight and he shook with. He was laughing and he laughed and he laughed. He said, "The best story I've heard. I'll tell you what, how about a bargain? You keep your cabin, and you provided you remain orderly officer for the rest of the voyage. And that's what I did.
Okay. Brian, thank you very much.
Gosh, that was a long one.
No.
Oh, sorry, Olive, you should have.